Charlie Cox almost played Foggy Nelson? What the hell? Netflix's Daredevil turns 10 years old next month. With Born Again premiering today, here are some things I bet you never knew about the 2015 original series. The Daredevil TV show is, of course, based on the Marvel Comics character Daredevil, first introduced in 1964. But did you know Marvel's Daredevil was inspired by an even older comic book character also named Daredevil? You see, back in 1940, comic book creator Jack Binder created this original Daredevil for Lev Gleason Publications. His real name was Bart Hill, and he was a mute orphan turned costume vigilante who was great with a boomerang. That Daredevil made his debut in Silver Streak number 6, 1940, and 85 years later, the character is now in the public domain, but he has appeared in recent Image comics under the name Double Dare or the Dynamic Daredevil. Anyway, about 20 years later, in the early 1960s, Marvel Comics found great success with Spider-Man, and so Marvel publisher Martin Goodman asked Stan Lee to come up with a similar character based on the original Daredevil from the 1940s. Lee recruited artists Bill Everett and Jack Kirby, and together they created Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil, the blind vigilante we'd come to know and love. The character first appeared in Daredevil number 1, April 1964. But for about 15 some odd years, Daredevil was considered a second-tier Marvel character. That is until Frank Miller took over the character in the early 80s. He matured Daredevil figuratively and literally, infusing his stories with the hallmarks of film noir and ninja movies. Daredevil then became a popular and influential part of the Marvel Comics universe. He made his first on-screen appearance in the 1989 TV movie The Trial of the Incredible Hulk, and then in 2003, Fox and Ben Affleck brought the character to the big screen. That movie was a modest box office success, but it got poor reviews from critics and fans. In 2012, the rights to Daredevil reverted back from Fox to Marvel, and around that time, Cabin in the Woods director and frequent Joss Whedon collaborator Drew Goddard pitched a Daredevil movie to Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios. But they all wondered whether this would be right for the big screen because Daredevil's source material was more R-rated and smaller in scale. As Goddard told IGN in 2015, the thing about Matt Murdock is he's not saving the world, he's just keeping his corner clean. Marvel on the movie side is not in the business of making $25 million movies, nor were they making R-rated movies. Also at that time, Marvel Studios and Marvel Television were very separate entities, and Marvel Entertainment, aka the big bosses above Kevin Feige, decided that Daredevil and his community of characters could be used to launch a TV empire. And because that would be through Marvel Television, it was something that the big bosses could control without Kevin Feige. And so Daredevil was headed for TV. In October 2013, Deadline reported that Marvel TV was pitching a 4-show package to various streamers. And then a few weeks later, we learned that Netflix had won the deal, which would have shows for Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, and Iron Fist, culminating in a miniseries Team Up the Defenders. And that structure was intentionally modeled off Phase 1 of the MCU. At this point, Drew Goddard was officially hired as EP and showrunner for the Daredevil series. He wrote the first 2 episodes, which were inspired by Frank Miller's 1993 miniseries Daredevil, the Man Without Fear. Though the show wasn't tied too closely plot-wise to any specific comic book storyline. Goddard, who grew up Catholic, really connected to that part of the character's origins. But then in May 2014, he left the project to pursue a never-made Sinister Six movie at Sony. Stephen S. DeKnight, who wrote on Buffy, Smallville, and created Spartacus, then took over as showrunner. Netflix and Marvel Television intended to keep these shows gritty and grounded. As executive producer Jeff Loeb said, they approached Daredevil as a crime drama first, superhero show second. DeKnight took inspiration from The French Connection, Dog Day Afternoon, Taxi Driver, and The Wire, which also inspired who the villain would be. As DeKnight told Entertainment Weekly, if you're looking for a juicy, multifaceted crime drama, Wilson Fisk was the obvious choice to play the antagonist. Charlie Cox's casting story is pretty interesting. He auditioned for the show in a general capacity and heard from his agent that the producers liked him. He then went off on a weekend wellness retreat in Scotland where he had no phone service. When he got service back, there were numerous messages from his reps saying the Daredevil producers wanted to see him again, but for the role of Foggy Nelson. Cox felt empowered by the retreat, and so he said he would only go in for a callback if it was for the role of Matt Murdock. The show agreed to those terms, and by May 2014, he got the part. Cox, of course, doesn't have red hair like the comics character, and at DragonCon 2016, he said they tried to dye his hair red, but it looked really weird. When Vincent D'Onofrio was cast, he said that he hoped his work would be the definitive portrayal of Wilson Fisk. And 10 years later, considering his numerous returns to the character, I'd say mission accomplished. Netflix, Marvel, and ABC Studios gave Daredevil Season 1 a $56 million budget, and filming began in July 2014 in New York City under the production title Bluff. The show didn't actually shoot in Hell's Kitchen. It was mostly filmed in Brooklyn, Queens, and Lower Manhattan, on location and on sound stages. For the show's action scenes, DeKnight and company were heavily influenced by The Raid. According to DeKnight, the famous Episode 2 single-take hallway fight was the season's most complicated action scene. They only had a few days to plan and film it. At first, they were going to fake the oneer and use hidden stitches in the edit to make it look like one take. But instead, they did it for real and used Texas switches to hide when actors were being swapped with stuntmen. It took the cast and crew 7 to 8 takes to finally get it right. DeKnight had to make a lot of choices about how R-rated the show would be. For example, when Fisk beheads a guy with a car door, DeKnight intentionally chose not to show the actual act of violence on screen. As for Daredevil's crime-fighting costume, they wanted the character character to graduate into the red suit. And so they started out with a homemade black outfit like the one seen in Miller's Man Without Fear. The black mask was made from layers of cotton mesh that conformed to Charlie Cox's head, but he could actually see through it. And on the topic of sight, to play a blind character accurately, Cox worked with blind consultant Joe Strechay. He became hyper aware of what his eyes were doing while filming, making sure not to focus on any visual stimuli. For example, he avoided eye contact with other actors in scenes. And the American Foundation for the Blind honored Cox in 2015 for his portrayal. When adapting Daredevil's red suit for the screen, they took the DD off of his chest, because in the story of the show, he only gets the name Daredevil in the press after he's already put on the red suit. Matt's sunglasses are a pretty important part of the character, and so the costume and props department tried out nearly 100 pairs of glasses until they found the right ones. Filming on season 1 wrapped in December 2014. The first season included more than 1,000 VFX shots, which were used to create digital doubles for certain stunts, plus blood, gore, and wounds. Like the journey with the costume, composer John Paisano at first kept the score sparse, but then when the character becomes peak Daredevil, the music became bigger and more superhero-y. Season 1 was supposed to feature a post-credit scene including the Punisher without showing his face, but it was scrapped because of how Netflix jettisons the credits in order to autoplay the next show. Daredevil Season 1 premiered on Netflix April 10th, 2015. Netflix didn't reveal viewership numbers at the time, but the series was successful enough to get 2 more seasons and continue the Defenders franchise, which included 3 seasons of Jessica Jones, 2 seasons of Luke Cage, 2 seasons of Iron Fist, and the Team Up Defenders miniseries. Daredevil introduced John Bernthal as the Punisher and Elodie Yung as Elektra in Season 2, and then Bernthal got his own Punisher show, which also got 2 seasons. Critics loved Daredevil. In Season 1, 99% of the 72 reviews assessed by Rotten Tomatoes were positive. Season 2 got 81% off 57 reviews, and Season 3 got 97% off 65 reviews. It was nominated for 5 Emmys over the years, but didn't win any. And in theory, Daredevil and the Defenders were in the same universe as the MCU, but connections were kind of tenuous throughout the 2010s. There was one character who crossed over from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and then some cross-references to St. Agnes Orphanage and Rocks on Oil. Charlie Cox had hoped Matt Murdock would appear in Civil War because of the role the character played in the comic book storyline, but it never happened. Later, when Marcus and McFeely were writing Avengers Infinity War, they considered showing Daredevil and Luke Cage in New York, but ultimately nixed the idea as they thought quick cameos would have been more frustrating for fans than satisfying. There was a planned 4th season of Daredevil with Typhoid Mary as the villain, but the show was canceled by Netflix in December 2018. Eventually, Daredevil and the entire Defenders universe reverted to Disney. All of those series can now be seen on Disney+. But it was unclear whether we'd see any of those characters again in the MCU. But a lot of those characters were popular and well executed on Netflix, so at first, Marvel Studios made a measured effort to keep them going. Charlie Cox, for example, finally got to cross over into movies, reprising Matt Murdock in Spider-Man No Way Home, and then later he was featured in the She-Hulk series, while Kingpin came back on the Hawkeye show and then on Echo. But all of this was leading to a full-blown revival show, Daredevil Born Again, which was first announced in March 2022. It took about 3 years to finally make it to Disney+, as the series went through a massive creative overhaul in September 2023. But with that, Marvel Studios seems to have finally embraced Daredevil as an important part of the MCU, giving it its rightful spot in the sacred timeline.